I think Perplexity acquiring hypothetically Google Chrome is not necessarily the one improbable and two uh, bad, objectively bad thing that people are making it out to be. And here's why. So one, let's talk about why I don't think the Perplexity deal is improbable. We can look at the past a little bit here. So honestly, there's not much precedent for such a small upstart company like Perplexity to have acquired such a large component of a media tech giant like Google is, right? And of course, Google is one of the largest companies to have ever existed. So by definition, there will never be uh, an example of this. But then again, it is not Google that is being acquired. It is a relatively small component of Google, which is the Chrome browser that is being acquired. Now, importantly, the Chrome browser does not itself peddle any ads. So what that means is Google's algorithm for ad revenue, which is where it makes most of its money, at least the largest percentage of it, is separate from the Chrome browser and is done through the search engine. And Perplexity has only put in an offer to acquire uh, the browser itself, not the search engine, which means that there is at least some level of difference between what Google would be getting from this acquisition, which is simply that it gets to be in the right set of guardrails if the DOJ or antitrust law in the US or in the EU chooses to pursue with this anti-big tech agenda that they seem to have going on. I honestly don't know what the political back ideology of this is, since honestly a large percentage of all of these companies are paying the largest amount of tax that each government for these countries get. This is including the EU, US, and most of Asia, in fact, where Google, Facebook, etc., have their presence. But that is besides the point, right? So why is it not improbable? I think we've already seen large companies or large portions of companies being acquired previously by smaller companies. I think a great example of this is when Avago, which is AVAGO, chose to acquire Broadcom, which is right now a very big player in the semiconductor space, right? And Avago at that point was smaller than Broadcom, but post-acquisition, it brought up the money, it paid cash, and chose to acquire Broadcom and then rebranded itself to match the Broadcom interface. And by the way, this acquisition was done largely through external funding, and we can touch on how that would play into this acquisition as well, the Perplexity Google acquisition. But what I mean is, if Avago can acquire Broadcom, which is not particularly during a boom phase, it is rather during a smaller interval, there is no reason why. Uh, there is no reason why Perplexity, which is an upstart AI startup, uh, cannot acquire a portion of Google uh, during the tech boom, which is during the AI boom, which means, I mean, you can have your opinion on whether AI is a bubble or not, but during the bubble, the good thing is that there's a lot of money flowing into the places where you would categorize as a bubble. So Perplexity, let's say, is a part of the bubble. The good thing is that it has a lot of external funding that would be prepared to acquire Google Chrome. And in fact, I think even during downturns, uh, regardless of where tech is progressing, at any given point, if you were to give any company the opportunity to invest in the acquisition of Google Chrome, they'd be up for it. So the improbability doesn't actually exist financially. There's a lot of money to go around, which will play a part in acquiring Google and Google Chrome. And the other thing is, so the way these deals would work is you'd pay upfront cash to acquire Google Chrome. It'll then get integrated into Perplexity over 1 year. And then once this integration is done, Perplexity will itself monetize Google Chrome through ads, through sponsorships, through its own content to make back that revenue. And right now, while Google does not disclose categorical revenue for Chrome, uh, estimates put it at about 50 billion, right? So 50 billion is sorry, 50 billion is the valuation. I think, somewhere in the low 100 millions per year, which means that if you trade at a multiple of, let's say, five even, every year you're making 500 million off of Google Chrome, and you can then grow that, of course, because I mean, advertising in AI in itself is a whole different field that no one has explored till now, but for sure there's a lot of money in getting advertisements through AI. And if Perplexity is the first one to crack that, then I think it can capitalize on Google Chrome much, much better and pay off uh, to its investors, to the external third party. Let's call it the NewCo, which, I mean, there will be a NewCo because there's no point in Perplexity remaining to be Perplexity post the acquisition if it goes through. Uh, since Google Chrome is a much bigger brand than Perplexity itself is. So that is why I don't think the acquisition itself is improbable. Of course, I mean, this is a complete disclosure in the sense the acquisition is unrequisite, is unrequisite. The acquisition itself is unsolicited, which means I don't think Google was looking for it. And if the choice falls down to it, it will never give away something like a Google Chrome. The only scenario where this does happen is when the US Justice Department feels like there's no other option to break up Google except selling off its Google Chrome, in which case there would be potential buyers for it. But apart from that, there's no scenario in which Google actually decides to sell it. But we're talking about the hypothetical where that scenario happens, right? So that is why I don't think probability is a question. It is physically, financially possible for integration with AI, with Perplexity AI. But the other question then is, if it is possible, do we think it's a good choice to make? And do we think it's a good choice for the user? And do we think it's a good choice for both of the companies involved, which are Google and Perplexity? I think let's talk about the user for a second. I think so. Let's talk about browsers for a second, in fact. Browsers was started when Yahoo, Google, etc. came initially onto the field, and they had I would say, a certain percentage of the market that was completely devoted to them. And this is somewhere before Microsoft launched Edge, which again got broken up due to antitrust. So I think that is a precedent for the U.S. Justice Department choosing to break off companies for antitrust regarding browsers. But we can talk about that in a sec. So Microsoft Edge uh, was a browser that had a large market share when it launched, but eventually Edge itself wasn't that good of a browser, and Google and to a lesser extent Yahoo, but also Yahoo kept improving their services. So Google came up to be the largest percentage of browsers, which is, I think, right now, if I'm not wrong, it's, I think, 90% of all browsers that are being used in devices worldwide are Google Chrome browsers. I don't think the number is 90. I think the number's 90% in the US. I think globally it's somewhere in the low 60s or low 70s, but you get the point, right? So more than 50% of all browsers in the world are Google Chrome browsers. And the other thing on top of that is Google has open sourced the code for building something like Chromium. If you know about Perplexity, what it's recently been focusing on is building Comet, which is its own browser, which is built upon Chromium. I had initial access to Comet, and I think it's a great browser which leverages a lot of the tech behind Chromium, and which is why it was made possible. And I think Arvind, who is the CEO at Perplexity, will be the first one to admit that without Chromium, there would be no Perplexity, and they've chosen to keep Chromium open source if the deal goes through. So that means that for the end user, you get a better browser which has AI integrated into it. Of course, you can choose not to use the AI, but what's the problem with having AI integrated into the already amazing experience of using Google Chrome? and then you have AI on top of it. So that's one plus point. And the other plus point is that Chromium continues to be open source, which means the developer community also has access to the same sort of code that Google has maintained for so long. So that's the good thing uh, for the users. For Perplexity, I think they are the only folks I'm worried about, and that is a little counterintuitive. So I'm worried about them because such a large acquisition would usually mean that Perplexity in itself would become a Google Chrome company, right? If you choose to acquire Google Chrome, you have to make sure that in the next 10 years you have to uh, pay off investors, pay off the external third party through Google Chrome. And how is that? You tend to focus everything in making sure your revenues are maximized from whatever party you're acquiring. So Avago did this when it rebranded itself completely to Broadcom, which then allowed it to double down on Broadcom's abilities, which previously existed. If Perplexity chooses to do that, and the AI race pans out to be that browsers simply become irrelevant, which is what Perplexity was initially batting for. Perplexity was just saying that all you need are web sources, which I don't agree with, but if that is the way uh, a browse, that is where search is headed, then there's no point in doubling down on purchasing browsers, right? And if that is the case, then they're going to lose all of their identity when they choose to go with Chrome, but but if that is a transaction that's worth happening, which means that if browsers continue to be the primary method for users to go through the internet, then I think there's no better alternative than to acquire Google Chrome. Why would you rather focus on anything else when this is such a large market for this is the largest market to have ever existed, right? So Google Chrome browsers are your way of accessing the internet, and the internet is the biggest market to ever existed. And so why would you not make that bet? So I think Perplexity will also be fine, and the only reason they will not be fine is when browsers itself don't uh, don't become the go-to place to access the internet. So I think it's not likely to happen. About Google, I think Google will also be a little betrayed by the fact that it has to let go of Google Chrome because of the DOJ. But then again, uh, Microsoft decided to part with Edge because of the so Microsoft didn't decide to part with Edge, of course. They just were forced to not make it the default, not make it the only browser that came with Microsoft. And so they didn't sell Edge, of course. They reformatted it to Bing, but the damage was done by that time, and the experience was overtaken by Google Chrome. But if Google decides to get away with let go of Google Chrome, then there has to be a replacement that has to come in, right? So this replacement might be a new browser that Google chooses to build from scratch using the open source Chromium mechanism, and then it's a fair market that Google is competing in alongside Safari, alongside the new Perplexity browser, alongside the browser company alongside Firefox, etc., etc., right? So you get the point. So I think that is where Google would lie, but I don't think Google would mind since the search engine remains in its hands, and Google will always have the search engine mode, which is the best algorithms for advertisements, the best advisors on the platform, the best user base of any platform ever to have existed. So I think Google will also be fine in the long run. I think Google would benefit, in fact, from getting away from letting go of Google Chrome because they then get to uh, build an AI native browser from scratch, which I mean, it can do in Chrome presently as well, but if the DOJ decides to uh, put an antitrust issue on the matter, there's nothing it can do, right? So I don't think uh, that is a problem that would come down to Google at the end of the day. It'll come down to what the government thinks about where Google's practices are at. Cool. I think those are my thoughts on this acquisition. So just wanted to, subtract from the negativity and the comicality of the acquisition. Of course, there's no future, 99%, there's no chance of this deal ever happening because the DOJ will never take such a bullshit, honestly, stance. They have the right people in charge of that to make sure that that doesn't happen. But if it does happen, the 1% chances, I don't think this is a particularly bad deal for anyone involved uh, in the deal, which is Perplexity, Google, and of course the end user. So all stakeholders benefit from it. Cool. Thank you.